Thank you very much, Aldrin. And please do remember that this is our question of the day. We are asking you whether or not coalition governments are functioning. But moving on to other news. This week, the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development launched the Under the Tree dialogues for men and boys in Hammanskraal in northern Gauteng. The dialogues will attempt to change the attitudes and beliefs to contribute to gender inequality, which also contribute towards gender-based violence and femicide as part of the response to government's National Emergency Response Plan to Gender Violence. Joining us now for more is Justice Department spokesperson Chrispin Phiri. A very good evening to you, Chrispin, and thank you very much for speaking to us. Very interesting concept, that under the tree, because it's got all kinds of symbolism, especially under in the African context. Tell us where the idea came from and what exactly you aim to do.
So, good evening to our viewers as well, and good evening to yourself. The thinking behind it, in fact, as you mentioned, the tree is quite a fundamental concept. If you actually look at the logo of the Constitutional Court, it's actually a tree, which symbolizes that in African cultures, justice is normally dispensed under a tree where important dialogues happen in our communities. And it's the same type of thinking here. In partnership with a lot of NGOs, we are saying to men in particular that we know that we are the problem when it comes to gender-based violence, and the time has come for us to put up a mirror against ourselves and really ask ourselves the hard questions. What is it about our societies? What is it about the way we are brought up that helps us perpetuate gender-based violence in our communities? And so in essence, it's men having a conversation with men to say, look, the buck stops with us and we cannot continue anymore as we think we should, because ultimately it harms a lot of women.
I mean, it's quite an ambitious project to re-socialize men and boys in order to stem gender-based violence. And then you'd have to agree first on what the main causes are, but also how do you uproot something that has been culturally entrenched over millennia, really, patriarchy, if you and just also the hegemony around the thinking of what are we talking about in toxic masculinity, for instance?
I suppose it's a big concession that laws alone are not going to change the behavior of any society. And so a lot more needs to be done, and part of it is re-socializing men in particular in this regard. And we think that at least starting to have a dialogue amongst men to say, well, what is it about our socialization that thinks that makes us think that women are our possessions and we're entitled to women's bodies? What is it? How do we actually end up reinforcing such conclusions, and how do we end up creating a society where rape culture is entrenched? I think we need to have those dialogues. And in fact, tomorrow the minister will be leading a dialogue at Hammanskraal with offenders who have committed gender-based violence atrocities, to understand from them, also with criminologists and psychologists, to understand from them what is it about their upbringing that has created such a tragedy in society. And the thinking also is that these people they come from our societies, so in any way we are the ones who have created these individuals somewhat. So society itself has to look itself in the mirror and say, what is it about our society that socializes people in such a way, and how do we undo these entrenched patterns of patriarchy and toxic masculinity? And
let's talk about that, and I'm glad that you say they come from our society. So then we're looking at societal norms. So if we're talking about gender, for instance, and unpacking that, it's a gendered behavior that facilitates some of these violences, but it's not necessarily biological, as some seem to think it is, and some of it is also passive.
Indeed, it is. I mean, from how we speak about the fairer sex in our communities as men, you really realize, if you really think about it, you really realize that we've really entrenched rape culture in our daily language. Every time, even sometimes government officials say, let's stop violence against our women. And you need to say, no, it's not our women. You don't stop violence. Or people would say, we need to stop violence because women are the most vulnerable in society. No, it's just, you just need to stop violence, period, because women are equals, they are humans. But also we live in a society that's innately violent. I don't know if you would have seen this weekend, or this past week rather, where a video on social media did the rounds, where people were arguing in a parking lot, and someone decided that the only way to solve this problem is to take out a gun and shoot such a person. And those are the conversations that we want to have, to say, how do we actually have How do we resolve conflicts without violence? Because it's something that is really quite vast in our society. A great deal of violence exists amongst men and even women. And how do we start having conversations about conflict resolution without violence? And we think that if we are able to have these conversations, if we're able to really go in and drill down on these issues in our communities, it will go a long way in addressing some of the matters.
What preventative measures are you thinking of, being a society that is proactive and not responsive to some of these issues? Some would say the law is there and it's very clear. What is wrong before the law, but then there becomes a grey area according to individuals and their interpretation of wrong.
No, there is no grey area of what is wrong. What is wrong, we all know what is wrong. As you say, the law is clear. But we think that preventative measures in this case is actually being able to understand what is it about our psychology that thinks you can get away with the law. The grey area arises there where you think, actually, maybe I can get away with a certain act. And what has been proven,
I don't think it's wrong.
If you don't think it's wrong, well, the law will show you that it's wrong.
But therein lies the rub, isn't it, Chrispin? You say the law will show you that it's wrong, but there are plenty of women or people who are falling victim to some of these very brutal and violent crimes who've said the law has not come to the party, the law has not shown them that it's wrong, and that's why some people continue to perpetrate this behavior.
That's precisely the point. What prevents people from perpetrating crimes is the fact that they will get caught and they will do time. That's what history has shown over time. They
should get as opposed to will get.
And that's what we need to fix in our justice system across the value chain. And one of the things that we have now employed is the National Emergency Plan, retraining police officers so that women feel safe to go and report these crimes when they happen to them. Because part of the justice failure is that people do not go and report the crimes because they do not have faith in the justice system. You go to a police station and you become a victim of secondary victimization. So retraining police officers and the NPA officers as well, and ensuring that all of the institutions within the criminal justice system are victim-centric will go a long way in ensuring that the people who experience these atrocities or the violence are able to say that I know that there's a system that is for me and not against me. And we think that that would go a long way in at least getting half of the problem right. But ultimately we think that we can have all the laws that we want in our society, but if we do not socialize ourselves differently, society will not change.
So let's talk about that word ultimately. This is a countrywide venture, but what happens thereafter? Because unfortunately this is something that South Africa is guilty of, a lot of talk shops, which in the end the impact is not realizable because people just end it right there.
Well, this is the first, I think, in our history where we actually are confronting men on this issue. Most of the time we have tried different types of social campaigns to change the behavior of men, but we think that this is an important start.
What makes it unique?
In that now we're having a conversation directly with men at a community level, but also not just government speaking, but then it's the entire society. So we have civil society on board, we have the actors in our communities on board, people who we really look up to in our communities. We're also partnering with the sporting fraternity as well. So it's a total societal effort. And so it's not just government going to the community, but it's everyone holding hands and saying, look, what do we do differently? So when we evaluate the outcomes, it would not just be government evaluating what its input was, but it would be society as a whole saying, well, collectively, this is what we have tried to do about this matter, but are we not yielding the results?
Holding government and holding ourselves to account.
Ultimately, that is the way forward.
Thank you very much, Chrispin Phiri, spokesperson for the Department of Justice and Correctional Services.